When you're removing the intake manifold, you need a couple of various tools because some nuts and bolts are going to be hard to get to, but I use this pipe to break some bolts loose that was too tight. I use these long needle nose pliers to be able to pull bolts and nuts out of the cracks in between the runners where it's hard to get to. I use a regular ratchet and then a 1/2 inch wobble extension, 12mm. All the bolts on the intake manifold is 12mm except for the bottom brackets, they're 14mm. I used a 12mm ratchet wrench, a 12mm regular socket, a deep well socket, and then I used the 14mm deep well socket on the brackets on the bottom. Used 3 different size extensions, some to make even longer, and then I used the smaller ones. Like there's a couple of them that you need to get to that the regular wobbles is too big, so I used an adapter for the 1/2 inch to then used a 12" millimeter on the smaller one with the smaller wobble too, and that should get it all off. Alright, on the bottom of the intake manifold where it hooks to the block, you have 14mm bolt there, 14mm bolt there, and you also have another one in between here that you can't see because of this rubber glove. It's right there. You remove all 3 of those, and that's a bracket that holds it down to the block. And there's also another one on this side. You have a 14mm bolt there, and another one right above there. Alright, these are all the bolts and nuts that are left over from the manifold. The bottom row is the bottom row, and the top row is the top row, of course. The 2 on the end tops are actual nuts with washers on them, just to give you an idea of the sizes you're going to be looking at. They're all 12mm. You got this place where it connects to the water neck on the motor. It's got 2 12mm bolts on it, and it's got liquid gasket on it, so you got to knock it loose. I already got mine pretty much knocked loose. Alright, next you have this hose you need to remove from the water neck on the manifold. It goes down to where it hooks into the other water neck on the block that you need to remove. It has a 8mm clamp on it, and you got to release the hose. It'll probably leak a little water. It just depends on how much it got drained out before. Really, you want to loosen it up and just kind of work around it with some pliers or whatever, and try not to damage it. Alright, next you have this hose right here you have to remove. You can either remove the clamp on each side of it and pull it off, which mine's being a butt right now, so I can't get it off. I'm going to take this, there's a 10mm nut here, and there's also another 10mm nut over here. It'll remove this whole bracket piece from the intake manifold and leave it on the engine. Alright, next after you have everything unhooked and everything, you can pull the manifold off the motor. If you left your EGR tube on the back, watch out because you're going to have to wiggle it off a little bit, which I left mine on, so you kind of want to pull it straight back and get the manifold off the studs on top, and then you got to get the front one off, and then the back one's going to take a little bit of coaxing to get it off. Alright, after you have your manifold halfway off, you can see this hose right here connected to this box. Runs up to the manifold right here. Just disconnect it on the manifold side, and then you'll be able to pull your manifold completely off. Your best bet on taking that off with the manifold is to take the breather separator off. It has 3, I believe it's 10mm bolts. There is 2 on the front side of it there. It's hard to get it. You really need to remove your, you gotta remove your alternator first, or pull it over and down. But you have 2 10mm nuts on this side, and you have 1 on the bottom side here to remove it. And it's held on with a liquid gasket, so you just gotta knock it loose. Just take it off of the manifold, because this one right here is really hard to get. Like when I went to pull this one off, I pulled it halfway off and then pulled this hose off, and it was a real pain in the butt to do, so I'd recommend just taking the breather separator off with the manifold. Alright, now that I have the manifold off, I want to go ahead and show you a little bit of things that are easier to see now it's off. Alright, this one right here is the one that connects to the hose that connects to the breather separator on the motor. Alright, this hose right here is the one that runs to the breather separator. Runs your breather separator right there. This right here is your PCV valve. Next you had this that was hooked to the water neck on the motor. This one right here is where it connected with the two 12mm bolts on the water neck. Then you had this one here that run to the water neck on the motor, and which is actually the water neck on the manifold here too. Had the hose run to it. This hose right here is the one that runs to the water neck on the back side. Okay, on the intake manifold, first off you have this hose right here. It's a coolant hose. Runs up to here, all the way down to here. You just follow it all the way down. Runs into another rubber hose. Runs down, runs into this rubber hose here. Goes back to a hard line. Runs right into the manifold right there. Right here's where it runs back into it. Now you come back up here, and there's another one that goes across. It's coolant line too. Runs down through here to the rubber line. And goes back to the side of the, which runs the water line too. Let's see, this one here you'll have to disconnect because it hooks the top and the bottom together. We're going to go through and unhook everything that hooks the top and the bottom together so we can break them apart. Then you have this one right here that hooked to your stock air box. We'll follow it down. It runs right here. Stays in the middle of these hard lines here. Runs down into this box right here. It's the EGR canister control and solenoid valve. We'll be removing that when we move our EGR system. Alright, this coolant line here runs down, cuts into a hard line, which will also run down into where it goes into your heater core. Also splits off here and runs into the manifold again. Then you have your third one, the last one, that's hooked to your stock intake. It runs down the hard line and runs back into a rubber line, which runs into the manifold right there. We'll be plugging that one. We'll remove it all and plug the hole on the manifold there. Alright, all these right here are your PCV system. You need to leave all that connected if you want to run properly. I've heard of a few people removing it and doing a few tricks to it, but we're going to keep it simple right now and just leave all that stuff hooked up. And this coolant line right here, the one that runs to your other side of your heater core, was the one on the block right there on the back side, right above where the starter goes in the motor at. Okay, you need to remove the solenoid here to disconnect the top and the bottom of the manifold. You can either unbolt it or you can pull the wires off, which I'm going to do all of it anyways because I'm going to remove that. And don't forget your wiring connection. It has a little square ring around it that you got to pull off. Alright, we're looking at the engine side of it. This is where it bolts to the engine at. This is the top side and bottom side. You need to disconnect this hose right here, either on this side or you can run it up to the top right there and disconnect it there. Either one you got to remove so you can remove the top from the bottom half. Then you have to remove the EGR temp the EGR in a canister control solenoid valve. It's connected. A couple, one or two hoses holding it top from the bottom. You need to disconnect this hose right here, either right there or you can run it up to where it screws on, bolts on right there. Disconnect it there. It's one that goes to your brake booster line. You need to disconnect this hose right here. You need to disconnect it there, or you can run it up to the fuel pressure regulator right there. Disconnect it here or at the bottom. Okay, looking here on the back side of the manifold, that would be at the firewall, you have your EGRC BPT valve right here. There on the left. And then on the right side you have your EGR valve. It bolts on right there. And it has your tube running down. Right here's your ACC valve. This whole piece right here. You need to remove this hose either right there or follow it up to the EGRC BPT valve and remove it there. Right here on the passenger side of the manifold, that's your adjusting screw right there to adjust your idle. It's on your ACC valve. Alright, I've removed the fuel rail and everything, and a few hoses. Also removed the EGR and the EGRC BPT and the EGR canister control solenoid valve and all the hoses and everything. Right there's where the EGR was. It's hooked to, and then you have the two where EGRC hooked to, and then your small little hard lines there. You got three there. There's one on the bottom right there. Then you had that one there that went to the fuel pressure regulator, and that one there went to the brake booster. Right here's where your plate bolted on. That plate right there. Now that I have the top half of the manifold off, you can see a lot of things better. This is where the EGR valve was at. If you got a block off plate from eBay or whatever, you need to take these three off, and that's where you hook it up at. Or a lot of people just use a block off plate they make themselves to hook on right here, but I'm using the eBay one, so I'm taking this off because I think it looks a lot cleaner. Okay, I pulled off a few things here. I pulled off the EGR plate. Those are 3 bolts that were on it. They're 12mm. It came off of right here, right there, there, and there. That's where it bolted to. And also the ACC valve right here has these 4 that hook on, and this one actually runs through this pipe here for your heater core too, heater core line. It bolts in on the back side right here, and then the other part of it, it's right here, bolts on that spot there. And then you had these well, actually this thing here has the 2 12mm bolts there of that size. You don't keep track of all the sizes and everything because some of them's different sizes. Like the top of the rail here is on these smaller 12mm nuts, bolts, which they hook to, let's see, right here and here. Then I had these 3 small 10mm bolts hooked on, holding this bracket on here for all your hard lines, all these hard lines here. And you need to remove the hose here and the hose here, either side, whichever one you want. Actually, you want to remove this side and this side here because they're the ones that hook to the manifold, and you're pulling them off the manifold, so that's the ones you need to disconnect. You don't really necessarily have to go as far as I'm going. I'm pulling all my stuff off just because I'm going to paint it up, clean it up and paint it. But if you're wanting to just remove your EGR stuff, you ain't going to go as far as I'm going. But also on another note, you have this one here that runs into the intake manifold. It's actually the one on the left side. You either need to plug that up, or you can run your blow-off valve off of it, or whatever. It's a vacuum line is what it is. It goes in behind the throttle body on the intake. Or you could also, thinking about that, you can leave it all hooked up, run it up to here, and just put like a plug on there. And if you ever needed a vacuum line for anything, you just pull that plug off and there you go, you got a vacuum line. Also, when you're going to remove those hard lines, you need to pull the hex bolt, the Allen bolt, off the throttle body there, because it has that bracket that runs through it. It's a 5.5 millimeter. Also, after you get that one off, you have this hose that runs around into the throttle body. You need to remove that too. There's also another small hose there. If you're wanting to pull the throttle body off, you need to remove that too, as well as this hose here too. It runs through the hard line up there. Right there's your temperature sensor. Runs up to the connector, which that connector runs into this harness here that runs off the ACC and the hard line and all that stuff. You have this big connector here along with this one. Those are only two connectors that's on there on the intake. Okay, what I did when I went to wire in my resistor for my EGR temp sensor, I run off this harness here. I cut the plug off the end of it and just soldered in the resistor right there. I'm gonna run some electrical tape around it and everything to keep it from the weather. And then I'm just gonna leave my EGR temperature sensor in the plug and cut the wire off of it. I'm gonna use it just for a plug. Okay, I've started putting my intake back together. As you can see right here is where my resistor is for my EGR temperature sensor. Then I cut the wire off the temperature sensor itself. I bolted everything back up, put a new gasket on the ACC valve, new gasket on the throttle body, put a new gasket in between the upper and the lower intake plenums. I've bolted all the railing back up and everything. The only thing that's left is pretty much your coolant lines. I also I left this hooked up to go up to the front, and I'm going to plug off with a vacuum plug, so in case I ever need a vacuum, I'll have it up there. And the rest of them, like these back here, leave them open, or you can plug them off, or however you want to do it really, because they're not going to be running to anything. No vacuum or no air or anything going through them. Then you have your EGR, which should go right there. I have a plate I got off eBay. It's a pretty expensive piece of metal right here, but I went ahead and got it. You'll just bolt it down like that. You'll put a RTV around here to seal it up. Make sure you get a good bead around there to seal it up really good, and put all three of your bolts in there and torque it down. Probably about, I don't know, 14 to 16 foot-pounds. You can either do that, or you can use your old one, which looks ugly, I think. And then RTV it and bolt it down, and then make you a plug for this side. It all depends on what you do. I think it looks cleaner with this one though, because after I get that on there, you're probably not even going to see it anymore. So that's what I plan on doing. Also, another thing to note that I just found out: if you use this plate off eBay, you have to get two shorter bolts there. These two are too long. As you can see, it goes to here, and then it bottoms out, where this one here runs all the way through. So you're going to get two shorter size bolts, probably about cut off about that much there. I had some laying around off of another car or motor or something, I don't know. So if you got spare nuts and bolts, you probably got it in a bin somewhere. Okay, now I got my manifold back on my motor. You can see here I have the three hard lines that was coming up. I plugged them off. I just put a little hose on there and screwed a 10mm bolt in there. They're not actually running anything except for this one on the right hand side. This one right here is the one that runs into the manifold behind the throttle body. Right down there. That's the one that runs there, which would be a good vacuum line whenever I go turbo on it or use it for anything really. And these two here actually don't run anything. I just plug them up, just keep the dirt out of it and everything. And also this one under the throttle body, I plugged it up as well. One that runs right into the nipple under the throttle body there. And this one right here is the coolant line. And also hooked everything back up, all the coolant lines under there. You had one that run to this coolant line right here, one that run right into the back of this coolant line right here, and then the line run off your breather separator and PCV system, PC valve, which actually runs up to the PCV system there. All four of those plugs here. Just the one that's in the middle. Make sure you plug all that up and get everything going right like it was. Okay, next I have this one down here is blocked off. These two back here is blocked off, which they didn't actually run anything neither. They ran to the EGR, all the EGR stuff. Pulled that off. There's my EGR plate right there. And don't forget to hook your fuel pressure regulator line back up to the bottom of the manifold there, as well as your coolant hose here runs to your heater core hose, right, which runs through your heater core with a rubber hose. And if you took anything else off, make sure you put it back on and put a new gasket on it and torque it down. Like I put a new gasket on my ACC valve and all that stuff there. And this one right here has a O-ring for it. You can see the PCV system there too, a whole lot better on this side. I painted all of it silver. Let's see. You can see where it hooks into the hose right there. That's where it hooks into the hose right there. That goes to the breather system. Also, you got to hook this back up. These two coolant hoses here. This coolant hose on top is the one that runs off the back side of this one. This hose right here runs onto this side of the throttle body. Right there. Hooks on the hose on the back side of that. So make sure you got those hooked up. Make sure you got all your hard lines bolted down good and everything, and make sure you torqued everything down properly in sequence as the factory service manual tells you. There's other things you can do when you're removing all that. You can remove all these hard lines if you want to and just run rubber lines off. However you want to do it, you can get creative with it, but I just pretty much left everything like that. Don't do like I did and forget to install your knock sensor before you install your manifold. Install your knock sensor first. It's located right there on the middle of the block. I installed a new one. It's a 12mm. It's the black black circle thing right there. That nut right there. It has a wire that runs all the way up to the front. This one right here, which will connect on this bolt right here on the upper timing cover. And pull that bolt off, and that bolt's 12mm too, and it torques down to 14mm, and the knock sensor's torqued down to 14 foot-pounds. This bolt's 14 foot-pounds. That bolt, the knock sensor bolt's 14 foot-pounds, and they're both 12mm nuts and bolts. And do that before you install a manifold. You're gonna have a heck of a time getting on there. After you got your manifold on, you need to put your brackets on. You have this one piece here. The bottom bolt on it there is they're all 14mm. You got 48 foot-pounds of torque on the bottom one, 27 foot-pounds of torque on the top one. And then you have the other bar over here. It's got 3. They're all 14mm, and they're all torqued to 27. You have the one in the middle right there of the motor mount bracket. Then you have 2 up onto the manifold. When you're going to remove your intake manifold off your S13 engine, you have this bracket on the back of the motor here with the 2 valve sensors on them. It's got 3 12mm bolts that bolt it down to the head. You take that and move it out of the way. Then you have your plunger here, it's held on by 2 screws. And then you have where the plunger connects to the butterflies in the intake. it's got a little clip right here that clips on right there. Looks like this right here. Just take some needle nose pliers and pull that off. And then you just want to work that off. You just got to turn it sideways and pull it off like that. And then it'll all come off. Then everything will be disconnected from it. Just make sure you got everything unbolted. Check all your lines everywhere. On my front side here, I went ahead, removed this, broke it loose. I'm going to keep it on the intake manifold. I got the hose on the back of here removed from the front timing cover, which actually runs up to right here, but I'm leaving it on the manifold. And then your breather separator box, three 10mm bolts there, break them loose, leave it connected to the intake. These two right here are 12mm, and that hose clamp was an 8mm. And then all your intake manifold bolts are 12mm. You got a nut on this side, a nut on this side, and the rest of them are bolts. Show you all the sizes right there. That's all the sizes. You get two longer ones. Also make sure you got your two brackets removed from underneath the manifold to the block. They're 14mm bolts. One on the left side here has got 3, and the one on the right side's got 3 as well. After you got everything unbolted, just grab it and wiggle it off the studs there, and it'll slide right off. And there you have it. If you didn't drain your water really well, or your fuel or anything, you'll have some fuel spillage or some water spillage, so be aware of that and keep some rags handy or whatever. And no smoking. Okay, now we're going to be going over the differences between the S13 manifold and the S14 manifolds. As you can see, and you probably already know, the S13 manifold has the butterflies on it, which is moved by this little trigger here, which works off your plunger there. But you can remove all this. I'm going to go into that a little further as far as removing it all. But also, on the S13 manifold, you can see right there, it has a plug where the temperature sensor would go, because the S13s don't have the EGR temperature sensor. On the S13 manifold, you have an extra hard line, where the S14s had only 3, the S13s have 4. But you're going to be removing all that stuff anyway, so you don't need to even worry about it. But also on the EGR temperature sensor, since you don't have one on this one, you still shouldn't throw a code because it don't have one. That's usually what throws the code on the S14s. I've not heard about anyone throwing any codes or anything after they moved all our EGR stuff, but it really doesn't matter anyways because you don't have to pass emissions anymore on those. But like before, you got four hoses where before there was only 3. You can remove all this stuff, every single bit of it. The plunger, the back plate with the 2 solenoids on them, both the EGR and the BPT. Remove all that stuff just like we did on the S14. Also, it still has the hose that runs right behind the throttle body, just like the S14. It runs up to the front. So it's still it's one on the far right. It's still the same. Just like on the S14, it's the far right one. You also still have the hose coming off the throttle body on the S13. It's basically all the same stuff, except you have the extra hard line, which actually runs to your plunger there for your butterflies. That's what the extra hose is coming from. Another thing to note on the S13 manifolds, you have the line that runs right here, which is basically for your fuel pressure regulator line. Like on the S14s, it just runs straight to it, but this one runs into a T, which goes through your EGR stuff again. Which actually, I believe, it tees off here, and then runs up through here, and tees off again here, which will run to another solenoid, which then will run into your fuel pressure regulator right there, on that line there. And then this one runs off, and it tees off and other things. It basically goes a bunch of places. Everything hooks to each other. But you're going to be removing all that. So you'll take this line here and you'll extend it longer and just run it straight into your fuel pressure regulator rather than run it through all that junk. You get all that. And also coolant lines. You have your one on the back side here, right below the ACC valve for your heater core to hook to your heater core hose on your car. Where the S14 had 2, this one's only got 1. So that's the only difference between the S13 and S14 intake manifolds. Is the coolant lines run to the heater core, the EGR stuff, which is all going to be removed anyways. There's no EGR temperature sensor on the S13. Other than that, everything else is the same. Well, I mean, it has the butterfly valves and stuff too, which I'm getting ready to go over how to remove those. Alright, when you're going to remove your butterflies on your S13 intake manifold, you have the 2 screws on each butterfly. You need to start off by removing those. After you have all those removed, you have another small screw right here in between number 2 and number 3 runner you need to remove. And after you have that screw out, just grab it on this end and just pull it out. Might take a little coaxing because it's got a lot of buildup on it, but it'll slide right out. I'm not going to be able to totally pull it out while I'm showing you, but that's how it works. You just go ahead and pull it all the way out. After you have your rod out and your butterflies and everything, you still have the hole that goes through the manifold that runs all the way through each runner. You're going to have to plug those off somehow. You can either use JB Weld or get somebody to weld them up for you. But you need to plug this hole on this side, and each side of the runners everywhere. You need to plug the holes. And also go ahead and do the screw hole right here because it's going to be one. Because if you don't do those, and there's going to be air going to be able to get through there, and that's not going to be good. It's not going to run properly. Probably the best method is JB Weld them, or just take it somewhere and get it welded up. Just take the whole intake apart and just take the top half of it, top plenum, and just get those done. It's really not that big a deal. It's just a little small pinhole. Then your next step is removing all the EGR stuff. Go ahead and remove all your hoses on all 4 of these hard lines, which was connected here and here and here and here. And then go ahead and break your 2 12mm bolts that hold the EGR right there, EGR bracket. So you can pull that off. And after you have those broke loose, everything's done, except for your line right here for your fuel pressure regulator. Pretty much what I do to break those lines loose, they've been stuck on there so long, I'll just grab a needle nose pliers, because these hoses aren't going to be no good no ways, even if you had to hook it back up. Just grab it, twist it to break it loose, because it's been on for a while, and grab it and pull it off. And then replace it. If you ever had to put it back on, you just go ahead and replace it. I would recommend replacing all the hoses everywhere. Even when you go to put it back together, your coolant lines, for rubber hoses for coolant lines, go ahead and replace those, because you know those things are deteriorated after 10 years of use. Bracket here you can take off and put a block off plate from eBay or something, or you can just make a plate that hooks on right here to block that off. But other than that, that's all the emission stuff on the S13. Just pour your butterflies off, pull all that stuff off right there, plug your butterfly holes and the screw hole for the butterfly rod, and that's pretty much it. Like I say, the only differences between the two is coolant line here, where the S14 has the 2 that run off the side, which it all pretty much ties in the same place anyhow. That's just where that runs for the S13. And then all this stuff up front, that's all the same and everything. Throttle body's the same, just has the 1 extra hard line, but you're not going to be using any of those anyways. And just like the front one here, you can plug it off and leave it hooked up to the manifold if you want, or you can just plug it off at the manifold right there if you're not even going to never use it. But it's just a vacuum source, so just take a vacuum plug and just stick on it, and when it goes to suck, it's not going to suck anything in because it has that plug on it, and it's not going to leak. On your S13 motors, this right here is where your other half of your heater core goes to. You got the inlet and outlet. One's on the manifold and one's on the block. Where on the S14 you still have this as well, but it still ties into another one which runs off of the manifold as you've seen in my other video on the S14. Okay, now we're going to remove the breather separator. There's 3 10mm bolts. Again, take all 3 of those off. All 3 of those bolts are the same length. Next, you want to take the rubber butt of the hammer and tap on it and break the gasket loose. And then just let it hang there. It's going to come off with the manifold. Next, we're going to remove the water neck here. It's 2 12mm bolts. Depending on how much water you actually got out of your motor, it might still drip a little bit when you get this off. Be prepared for that. Both those bolts are the same length. Next, you want to take a 5-in-1 tool or a gasket scraper and hit it with a hammer and break the seal loose in between there. Just tap it lightly. You don't want to gouge it. And that's basically disconnecting that, and that's going to go with the manifold as well. Okay, you have a hose on the intake manifold here. You can either move it right here with this bracket behind the water neck that we just moved, or you can remove it up here behind this water neck with that hose clamp. We're going to move it on this side because we find it easier to move it this way. First thing you want to do is pull your connectors off just to get them out of the way, easier access. Again, loosen up that clamp. Basically all that hose does is just loops around from the back of this to the back of the water neck over there. When you get the clamp loose enough, you want to grab it and wiggle it around to break it loose. Then after you got it broke loose, you need to break the hose loose. You might need to use a screwdriver or a pair of nose pliers or something without damaging it. Just keep working it off like that and be patient. Now that hose is going to stay on the motor while we remove the intake manifold, so we'll have to remove that later as well. Okay, the hose on the back here goes to the block right there. You can either disconnect it there, which we'll eventually have to do anyways. So you can disconnect it there, you can disconnect it there, or you can remove the 2 10mm bolts there and there and just leave the whole hose with the hard line on the motor, and then get the intake manifold off and then remove it from the block, because it's pretty difficult to get off right here because everything's in the way. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the 2 10mm bolts and take it off after we get the manifold off. Okay, now we'll just let that hang there. You could probably go ahead and take the bolts and just thread them back into the manifold. Or you could put them in a Ziploc bag, however you want to do that. The reason we're taking all the bolts off the block and putting them in Ziploc bags is because we'll have to send the block to get it hot tanked, which is basically a chemical cleaning. You don't want to leave any kind of bolts in the block at all. Now we're going to remove the intake manifold bolts, starting with the one on the bottom and the front. We're basically using a wobble extension and some various extensions to get it through there. And you're going over the top of the hard line here to the bolt. You can take it off. You basically want to work your way outside in, removing it. Okay, the next one's on the back, on the top. It's a nut, 12 millimeter. You need to work it through the EGR and BPT valves there to get it over to the nut. We're using the wobble with some smaller extensions. And we'll go ahead and take the magnetic one and get the washer off. Okay, the next one's here on the back below. It's a bolt. We're using the same contraption here. And now we're going to move the next one. It's the one on top. It's a nut. They're all 12 millimeter. There's also a washer on there too. You need to take a magnetic one and get that off. Okay, the next one's on the inside here, on the bottom. Still using the same contraption. Get it down through the runners there. And you want to always take the magnetic one and get the bolt out. Okay, your next one's on top here. Okay, your next one is the one below the one we took off. See right here, his socket is actually touching the piece right there. So it's going to be a little more difficult to get off. You're going to have to thread the bolt back in a little bit so you can get his socket off. You just want to thread in just enough to get the probably half a turn, just so you'll have enough to get your socket back off, and you can remove the bolt. So we'll take the magnetic one and just keep rolling it around the bolt until you get loose. Hey, there we go. Okay, the next one's on the top here. Okay, the next one's down here in the middle, on the bottom. That one right there. Basically, the contraption we're using is all the extensions, and you gotta put it through, you gotta feed it through here, and then put the socket on the front while it's down inside there, because you can't get it to go through the hole on this side over here. And after you got the socket on there, feed it down and get it on the bolt. Get it loose it off. Okay, your last one's on top, right here in the middle. You can remove it off. You don't got to worry about holding the manifold, it's on the studs. You have a stud on this side on top and on the other side on top. So the manifold will stay in place. You want to use the magnetic one, pull the bolt out so it doesn't fall down. Okay, basically here's the layout of all the bolts for the intake manifold. All the ones on the bottom are the same length. The one in the middle on top is the same as the ones on the bottom. You got two long ones in the middle on top, and then you got two nuts and two washers on the ends on top. If you were moving the manifold on the car, you would take one of your nuts, go ahead and thread it on, and then leave enough thread to thread the other one on. So you have two nuts on there, tighten them to each other, and then back off the first nut that you put on so you can remove the stud off the head. So you'll be able to lift the manifold straight up. That's the only way you're going to get it off on the car. But now after we have everything off, if you still have your EGR tube on the back, this right here, it's going to hit the head over there, the block over there. So you want to watch out for that when you're pulling it off. Because basically you're going to pull the manifold straight back, but you're going to have to wiggle it off somewhat because it's going to want to hit the EGR tube over there. The bottom of it's going to want to hit the oil filter here, which you could probably just remove the oil filter and get that out of the way. And it should come off fairly easy. We'll go ahead and do that now. Just want to work it off easy. Make sure nothing's catching anywhere or hitting anything. And again, you want to watch your EGR tube on the back because it's going to be wanting to hit the block. And it's off. Here on the 96 intake manifold, which is basically the same as the 96, 97, and 98, you have all the extra little small metal hoses and rubber hoses here and up here too, which I'll go over these when I show you on the car where they go to and everything. You also have the evap canister purge control valve, which is not on the other ones. You have a one-way valve on here, but you also have the evap canister purge control solenoid valve. Here on the back here you have your EGRC solenoid valve. You still have your fuel pressure regulator in the same spot. You still have your BPT and EGR valves. That's all still the same. And also another extra piece is the black one in here. You can see that, which is the evap canister purge volume control valve. You have your port right here, where on the other ones would plug it off and use it for like turbo or something. Well, actually this one runs into the evap canister purge volume control valve, into the front of it there. And then I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's another port right back there, runs over here and runs back up through here into the evap canister purge control valve right there. And then from there it runs all the way over here into this hard line, which then runs over to another rubber line which runs into your evap canister purge control solenoid valve. And then it runs out of there into a rubber line, back into a hard line, back to a rubber line, to your one-way valve, back to a rubber line, back to a hard line, which runs back into a rubber line, back into a barb that comes out of the intake manifold there. And then you have this one here, barb, comes out to a rubber line to a hard line, which will run into the car, which I'll show you that when we get inside the car. Then you have a two-way right here, which this one runs up into the car, right here, and then runs down into a Y here, which runs down to another hard line on the bottom of the motor here, on the bottom of the intake manifold here, which it runs down inside the piping there and runs into this hard line here, which is teed into it, which then it runs up this way in between here, which basically runs up this hard line right here into this hard line right here, which comes out into the rubber line, which is connected to your air tube or your cold air intake, whatever you're using. And then coming back here where the T was, we'll come back this way. It runs down through here to this hard line here. It runs into the hard line right here, which runs into this rubber line, which runs over to your EGR solenoid valve right here, which going this way runs out to another rubber line, which runs up to the hard line, still following it down, runs over this way, up here, runs over, up over here, and into this rubber line right here, which then connects into a barb into the throttle body right there. So then if you want to run off the other side of the EGRC solenoid valve, runs into this rubber line here, up into this hard line, which is on the bracket here, runs up this hard line here, right into the BPT valve, out of the BPT valve, into the EGR valve, which as you can see under here, the BPT valve runs down from a rubber line into a hard line, which coils up behind this bracket here back into the EGR bracket. You can see right here where it bolts into it. A little hard to see, get the angle on that, but the hard line coils up right there and runs into the bracket right there. And then back to the Y branch right here, runs off into the rubber line, into a hard line, into another rubber line, up into a hard line right here, which runs up through the runners here, up top, back behind this one, and then runs over into this rubber line right here, which then runs into your evap canister purge control solenoid valve right there. And then this rubber line run off of it right here runs down into a hard line, which runs over here into a rubber line here, which runs over into your evap canister purge control valve right there, which as you can see down in between the runners here and hidden behind the hose there of the evap canister purge volume control valve, you still have your EGR temperature sensor right there. It's got the two little wires hanging off of it, which if you want to remove all the emission stuff off these manifolds, 96, 97, and 98, you can still solder in the resistor on there to keep from throwing codes and remove all the emission stuff, every single bit of it, just like we did on the 95. It should not throw a check code on the dash because of the resistor here. What we're going to do on this particular intake manifold is we're going to leave the tube on, EGR tube on. We're going to put a nickel inside the manifold or turbo manifold or whatever kind of manifold you're using. Put a nickel in there and then bolt it down. That'll seal it up so it will not work, but it'll be there for visual inspection. We're going to solder in a resistor on the EGR temperature sensor, and we're going to leave everything on here, everything hooked up and all the emission stuff on there. But it's not going to work properly because this is going to be plugged up, but it's going to cut all the carbon buildup on the pistons and everything that the EGR system causes. It's going to cut all that out. I've heard a few people say doing it this way, they still don't pass emissions. So keep that in mind. It is possible you can, but some people say they don't, so I'm not going to say you can. But like I said before, we're going to put a nickel in this one, plug it up, bolt it down so it'll be there. It looks like it's all stock. We're going to solder in the resistor on the EGR temperature sensor and leave everything just like it was stock. Hook everything up like it was stock, everything. But if you want to, you can remove every bit of emission stuff just like we did on the 95. If you want to remove it all, you can. But you're not going to be able to pass emissions. So basically, if you do that, your intake manifold will look just like mine did on the 95. Except I didn't remove the hard lines and things that you can remove. But the rest of it should look exactly the same. You'll plug up everything just the same way, just like down here on the bottom of the intake manifold. You can plug this off. But the difference in this one versus the 95, this one had a hose that went to a hard line to the front of the intake manifold. where this one don't. Because this one runs into the evap canister purge volume control valve. So you'd have to run a hose from this one here out. But it's still the same concept. You don't have all the hard lines on the front here that you had on the 95s and the S13s. But like I said, if you're removing it all, you're not going to have the hard lines anyways. They're not going to be doing anything. Okay, here on the car we have the map borrow solenoid switch valve right there. It has a hose coming off the bottom of it to the intake manifold. This hose right here. And it hooks on the intake manifold right here on this hose barb, which goes up to the bottom of that. And then it comes off the top here and runs over this hose barb right here in the middle. And then you have another hose running across here up to the absolute pressure sensor. If you have this hose right here, it goes all the way down and follows along on the bottom of the car all the way back to your evap canister, which the evap canister is located on the passenger side behind the rear tire. So that's basically the layout of the engine bay for the 96, 97, and 98 models. Okay, when you're going to remove your canister, you have two 10mm nuts there you need to remove for the bracket. It goes down and runs down through the frame down there. You can remove that, and it splits off and runs down to this hard line. You just follow this hard line all the way back, and it runs down below down there to another piece where it runs down, and you can remove that as well on that hard line. Okay, then up top here you have where it runs out this rubber hose into a hard line. Follow the hard line all the way back. Let's see. Goes all the way back, runs around all the way up through here, and all the way down across firewall here, runs back down. It's the thicker hard line. The other two are thinner. And then it goes all the way down and runs into this rubber line here, which then it runs back to your fuel tank. Basically what you can do right here is you can either disconnect this whole hard line and remove the whole hard line, and some people put like a check valve on here, and some people just leave it open. So you could probably just move the whole hard line up top, leave the one going to the fuel tank. And then as far as your two hoses that ran to your intake, your air box, you're going to remove those as well. You also have this 10mm screw that clamps this together that you need to remove so the canister will come out. And also the hard line that runs off of this T right here runs all the way back and all the way down to underneath the car. You can remove that whole hard line too. As you can see, I've already removed my hard line from up top. Pretty much what you gotta do, if you still have your brake booster on, your AC stuff on, your power steering stuff on, you just got to keep bending it all the way out. It don't matter if you bend it up or tear it up, because you're not going to use it again. After you have all that removed, and you go to remove the bracket, you have your two 10mm nuts on top here. And then you have another 10mm nut down here that you need to remove. It just runs through over to the smaller piece over here. Alright, on your intake, you have your MAF sensor. You need to disconnect it, just pressing the button and pull out. Then you have your air temperature sensor. You need to disconnect it as well. Then you have a 10mm screw in here in the fan shroud. You need to disconnect that as well. On the intake, you got this screw here you need to remove. Hooks to the fan shroud. And then your next bolt is the one on the end here that you need to remove. Both these are 10mm screws as well. And next you have 8mm clamp that clamps the intake manifold to the MAF. Loosen that off. You don't actually take it off, just loosen it up. Alright, next you need to remove the hoses coming on your intake manifold. Well, not your intake manifold, but intake itself, squeeze these two clamps and kind of a pain to get off sometimes. There we go. And then next you got another 8mm clamp. Just loosen up. Then you go ahead and pull the whole intake off. So you need to go ahead and remove this right here. Has a 8mm clamp on it. Remove this breather hose here that goes to the valve cover. Just squeeze the clamps on it and pull it off. On your air box you have 4 of these little clamps. You just pull them back. You got 2 on each side. 2 more down there. And just pull your whole box off. Then you have your filter. Remove that. Then on your air box you got this vent tube here you gotta remove. It's got these little plastic clamps on it. They just look like this. These little things with teeth on them, so you just pull them right up. And just over here where it connects to the vent, it just pretty much slides in there. So it just pops off. On the bottom side of your air box, you got 3 10mm nuts you need to remove. You got one up top here. And you got 2 on the bottom. And the whole thing just slides right up. And you have your vent tubes here, which hooks to the bottom down there. Okay, when you're going to install your intake, go ahead and take one of your couplers, put it on the throttle body, tighten up the clamp on it, go ahead and put another clamp on the end of it. Don't tighten it up yet because you got to put your intake on. You need to go ahead and pull your hose off your stock hose off if it's still on there. Pull your stock hose off your valve cover too, because your intake kit will come with 2 hoses. Actually, it'll come with 3 hoses in a T, plastic T like that. And you'll have to cut the hoses to size when you get on there. But go ahead and make sure you got your 2 clamps on there. This one's loose, but just on there. And get ready to slide your intake on. And also go ahead and remove your screw that went on your shroud right there. If you're like me and you removed all your EGR emission stuff, the bottom nipple on your intake, you'll have to plug it off. I'm just using a hose and just a small bolt. Go through there, tighten it down, just close that hole off. You could either you could JB weld it closed or get somebody to weld it closed or whatever you want to, but I'm just going to close mine up like that right now because that's one of the things that went to your emissions and I'm not needing that. Okay, after you got all your hoses cut to size and your T fitted on, it'll look like that. Just make sure when you're cutting your hoses, it don't kink where it bends. Make sure this is not going to get in the way of the fan. When the fan spins, as you can see, it's not going to hit the fan. And it's pretty durable. It's not going to move up and down a lot. You don't need any clamps on anything like that. I put it on this end just because, you know, it was on that barb fitting there. You don't actually need that, but I had it, so I went ahead and put it on there. Make sure you tighten your clamp down. Make sure you put your bolt on there. And that's it on far that side. Then we're going to go over here and do the MAF adapter and the MAF and the filter. Okay, next you want to go ahead and put a coupler on the end of your intake. Tighten this clamp down and slide your MAF. Go ahead and put another coupler on there. Slide your MAF in, tighten it down, and take your adapter. Run it comes with 4 bolts and 4 locking nuts. Run your bolts through this way and your other bolts through this way and put your nuts on. But you're also going to have to install your air temperature gauge on the side over here. It's already threaded out for the holes. You just slide in there and bolt the holes down. Bolt the bolts down on it. And if you want to, you can run your bracket, the bracket that was on the stock box. You can run it through one of these bolts and nuts if you want to. If you don't, then you don't have to. It don't really matter. Okay, you have your air temperature sensor screwed in. As you can see, there's a little bit of space in between there. It does not matter, it's still secured down. But if you put the bracket on, it looks like mine right there. If not, then that's just hanging there, which is totally fine too. When you're going to tighten down your 10mm nuts and bolts, these are locking nuts. You don't need no kind of washers or locking washers or anything like that. Do not tighten it too much because your MAF is plastic and it will crack. So just get a little snug on there, it'll be good. Like I said, these are locking nuts, so they're not going to come back off. Just get them snugged on there. And as far as the screws on here, just snug them on there. Do not tighten them down very tight neither. It'll be good. Go ahead and plug your plugs back in. Screw your wiring harness down to your shroud. And it's onto the filter. You go to install your filter. It has a little edge on the inside of it. Just let it slide up. Just kind of hold the edge of it down a little bit and push it in, slide up till it hits that lip there. Lip touches the metal. And then run your clamp on there. Tighten it down. And that is a finished product. Some kits have a bracket that runs from here down to one of these bolts down here, which keep it from bouncing up and down. But as you can see, it's pretty stiff. It moves with the fan shroud, so it's not needed. Okay, I'm getting ready to remove my steering rack bushings. Go up from under the front of the car, come under the cross member here. You have a 17mm bolt up in the hole here, and then you have another 17mm bolt right behind it that goes in right there. I've already removed mine, so they're not in there. You have the exact same thing on this side too. One up in that hole there, and one back here on this back side. Then up top here, after you have your bolts removed, you have these metal brackets on each side that you need to pull up. Now will expose your bushings. I'll be able to do this while I'm showing it to you, because basically what you gotta do after you get everything unbolted and you got your brackets off, you gotta pick up on your steering rack like that to remove the bushing. The bushings have a slit in them, so they'll actually come apart. They're not completely all the way around, they have a slit in them, so they'll come apart. And then just do one at a time. Pull this side out and pull the bushing out, put the new bushing in, and then push it back down. Because if you're like me, I still got my tires on and everything, and it's jacked up in the front, so just so you don't have to mess anything up or get anything misaligned or anything like that, or you don't have to remove any kind of power steering lines or nothing. Okay, now that I have the bushing removed, you can see how it has the egg shape on the metal right there. That's the same way this goes on. It can only go on one way. It's got the egg shape on it, and it has a slice in it there, so you can open it up. So basically what you want to do is open it up and slide through this backside first and kind of twist it down while you pick up on it, because you're not going to be able to pick this up very much. It's just a little bit. Now I have this side on. Where the slit was, the slit's still open a little bit, probably about that much. But as soon as you go to bolt your bracket down and everything, it should close up good. It'll be the same deal. Just pick it up and pull this bushing off. Actually, this one's already so wore out I can just peel it off anyways, not even picking it up. That's what you got. Show you a difference between the old one and the new one. This is the new one. The old one is really, really rubbery, and the new one is, of course, not. It's a lot stiffer. It's gonna last a lot longer too. All right, when you go to put this bushing on here, just make sure it's not overlapping each other when you go to put your bracket back on. Just make sure the ends are together. Put your bracket on and go ahead and install your bolts and torque them down to 80 foot-pounds. Also, when you're going to install your bracket, the driver's side bracket has this little point on the end of it. As you can see, it'll go here, because if you put it on this side, it won't fit at all, because it's going to hit that bracket right there. So you'll know which side it needs to go on, but make sure you install that properly. And this side goes 80 foot-pounds as well. And there it is, the finished product. Get the brackets on, torque down to 80 foot-pounds. As you can see, the little bit of play in that bushing there. The driver's side one works just fine on the S14, but on the S14 the passenger side bushing does not work. It has a good bit of play in it. I don't know if you can see this or not, but there's a good bit of play in there. It's already torqued down to 80 foot-pounds. Okay, as you can see, this is the the energy suspension passenger side bushing, which is supposed to be for the S14, but it will only fit on the S13. It's too thin for the S14. And as you can see, the Nismo bushing here for the S14, you can see it's a whole lot thicker than the energy suspension one. See the thickness of that one versus the thickness of that one. And also, as far as the diameter, you can also see the inside is smaller of the Nismo than it is the energy suspension. So that's going to take care of the slop you had from your energy suspension one, because it's too thin, which gives the rack more to move. The thickness of that one, the Nismo one, and you have the thickness of the energy suspension one. Nismo's a tad bit thicker, not much at all. I'm waiting to hear back from energy suspension on what they're planning on doing with the S14, because obviously they don't know about it. It's not fitting because they're selling them as working with the S13 and the S14, which they don't work. Okay, I have my Nismo steering rack bushings installed in now. You have the 2 bolts on each side. Both of them need to be torqued to 80 foot-pounds. The Nismo bushings do work on the S14. You don't have the slop anymore. No more play. Where the energy suspension bushings do. They do have play in them. Like I said before, you can use the driver's side energy suspension, but you cannot use the passenger side. Passenger side, when the circle one, it will have a lot of play in it. When you're going to change your spark plug wires or your distributor cap or rotor button or anything, on the stock wires, they all have numbers on them, 1, 2, 3, and 4. The S14s has 4 wires and the S13s has 5. There will be one in the middle for the S13. It goes to an external coil. On the S14s, the coil is on the inside of the distributor itself. That's why there's only 4. But you need to keep track of where your wires go. The one on the top left is number 1. The one on the top right is number 2. The one on the bottom left is number 3. And the one on the bottom right is number 4. And up top, you have number 1 cylinder, number 2 cylinder, number 3 cylinder, and number 4 cylinder, going from front to back. When you're going to remove the distributor cap, after you remove your wires, you can see on top there you have an 8mm bolt. You have one on top there and one on bottom. Do not mess with these bolts here, this one or this one, because if you loosen these and twist this distributor off, it's going to knock your timing off. So all you need to do is remove this bolt here and this bolt here. Okay, after you have your 2 8mm bolts out, just pull the distributor cap off. Just pull it straight out. Inspect it and make sure it's not cracked anywhere or anything. And if it is, then replace it with a new one. Also, you have your rotor button right here, which, if you look at the new one, on the back side, you can see how it goes on there. It just basically slides on there. So you need to inspect it too. Basically what happens is this little felt pad right here on the side hits the little metal prongs on each one, and it just keeps spinning around. That's basically how that works. So if it needs to be replaced, go ahead and pull your rotor button off, put a new one on. I'm going to replace my rotor button and my distributor cap because they're cheap, you know. Might as well go ahead and do them. Now I have mine installed. Basically, when you go to put your screws back on, basically all you need to do, hand tighten them first, and then take, you know, Phillips head screwdriver or flathead screwdriver, and just hand tighten it. Don't tighten it too much because this is plastic and it will crack. So just get it a little snug, you know. You ain't got to torque it down or anything. And since you're replacing your rotor button and distributor cap, you might as well replace your spark plugs and wires too. I'm using the NGK Irradiums. It's the BKR5 EIX-11. It's for the 95 Nissan 240 S14s. I'm pretty sure all the 240s use the same. I'm also using a set of NGK plug wires. Basically like before, you have 4 for the S14 and you have 5 for the S13, so make sure you order the right set of spark plug wires. And these are all numbered. It has 1, 2, and 3, and 4 on them. And you'll have 2 longer ones and 2 shorter ones. The shorter ones are for number 1 and number 2 cylinder, and the longer ones are for 3 and 4 cylinder, since it goes back further from the cap itself. Alright, when you're going to remove your fuel filter and install a new one, you have 2 screw clamps. It's Phillips head screw clamps. You got one on top and one on bottom. After you have your clamps removed, slide them up out of the way and take you some needle nose pliers or something, and grab hold of the hose with it and just twist it back and forth to break it loose. Don't squeeze it too hard and tear up the hose, so you can reuse it if you need to. You want to keep turning it while you're pulling up on the hose. Be careful with this fuel hoses though, fuel lines, because usually they'll start draining a little bit of fuel too, so make sure you got rags down below. And this is definitely not a good time to be smoking a cigarette or anything else. After you got the top one off, get the bottom one. As you can see, this is the Z32 fuel filter, and this is the stock 240 fuel filter. As you can see the difference, the Z32 is a lot bigger, and it's going to filter a whole lot better as well. It's a good upgrade for the 240s. I recommend doing this upgrade. Any hoses that need to be replaced, like say this one here, it's all cut up and tore up. If you don't know the size, just take the hose off and go to your auto parts store or whatever. They'll have various sizes that you can get. And always get more than what you need, just in case. If you're gonna use the JGS motor mounts like I am, I'm using the rubber motor mounts rather than the urethane, because I'm gonna use it for a daily driver, and these are got less vibration and not as stiff, but they're still good. I don't have the rubber on there. I had to take mine off because I stripped out the stud. But when you get them from JGS and they're out of the box, the driver's side will look just like this one, and the passenger side will have the exact same thing, except the Allen bolt will be over here. That's the only difference between the driver's side and the passenger side for the S13s. But when you go for the S14s, you pull the Allen bolt off this side and put it on this side. Because when you go to install it onto the car, like this is say this is the passenger side one, you want the Allen bolt to be up like this. Like it sits in the car like this. This is the front of the car this way. This is the back of the car this way. It'll sit like this on the passenger side with the Allen bolt pointing up, and then on the driver's side it'll be just like that with the Allen bolt going up, just like that. And on the S14, it is when you like if you stuck the mount down in there and the mount in down there, like that and like that, it's going to be off-centered a little bit. They're not going to be perfectly centered with each other across, because the S14's got an offset for some reason like that. But just to let you know that and justify that, how to do that. And you want to torque them down to the car, the motor mount to the car, about 30 foot-pounds rather than 58 foot-pounds, because these aren't really made for 58 foot-pound torque. And as you can see, it has the bolt going through it, and it's just a hole really, so it kind of just holds, not very much because it's circled out, so it don't really lock it in there real well. I mean, it's knocked in there, but it still ain't gonna hold 58 foot-pounds. That's why I had to pretty much pull mine back off, because I stripped my stud out. Okay, if you use the JGS transmission mount, like I'm gonna do, you have this plate that comes with it. Basically all it is for you to guide your holes, because you need to drill your holes out. The ones on the outsides is the stock ones, and the ones on the insides not. As you can see, I slotted mine out some, but it's no big deal. It's going to still work the same way. And as you can see, the plate on the inside, it's beveled out right there, so it can't fit on there. So you don't even need to use this. This is just a guide to drill your holes out. That's all it's for. So after you get that on, after you get those drilled out, take your suspension. Your transmission mount. It's actually an energy suspension mount, but this is what he uses. And these two bolt holes right here are the ones that bolt through these holes. And it bolts on. It don't really matter which way it goes on. It's pretty much the same way each way. And then when you're going to install the spacers here, this kit's made for a Z32 as well, the 300ZX. You want to use the slotted ones and use your make sure that you have you get M10 1.25 times 40, and you get 4 of these. You're gonna have one on each side, and then you got 2 more over here. Also on your stock transmission mount, this is the S14 transmission mount. As you can see, this is the one that's not cut. You got to cut the rubbers right there on the side and cut this whole piece out. End up looking like this. So what you're going to end up doing is you're going to take your transmission mount itself and let's see, it's sitting like that. So it's going to basically sit down in there, and then you're going to bolt that through to the transmission with the stock nuts and bolts for the transmission. And that's pretty much like a completed mount right there. I'm using the smaller nut bolts that come with it, but you don't use them for the 240, but you will for a Z32. I'm just putting them through the middle right now just to hold them on there instead of holding them on there by hand. And when I get these in and bolt them to the chassis, I'm gonna pull that out. Or you could leave it in there too, whatever you like to do, really. That's basically it right there. You normally had to cut the stock mount out and then put this inside of it, but since I already had my stuff installed and had the transmission messed up and pulled out, I noticed that it raised the transmission up about that far. So I'm going to just go ahead and pull this off. If you're not using your exhaust tube mounting bracket, you don't need it anyways. All it's going to do, that's going to mount to the bottom of the transmission right there. Just like that. And that's what it's made to do anyways. It's made to mount right up to it. I'm not exactly sure why Lance at JGS wants you to use this one for, except for the fact of the exhaust tube mounting bracket being on it. That's the only thing I can think of. But that's what I'm going to do. Just mount up just like that. Transmission mount finished. You don't necessarily have to use these. You can probably use the stock ones. Since we pulled that bracket off, it would definitely fit. And then of course you got to put your adapters on. Remember, use the slots, not the tapped ones. Tapped ones are for the Z32s. The overhang goes towards the front of the car versus the back of the car. It goes towards the front. Okay, when you're going to install your oil filter relocation kit, I used the Permacool. It's the 10695 and the 10795. They're pretty much the same thing. You have adapters for them to screw the filters on, and an adapter to screw it onto the engine block itself. On the one I'm using, you can actually still use the exact same oil filter as used for the stock 240. And to start off with, you need to take this adapter, and this was the best place I had because I still have AC and everything, and it was really hard to find the spot for it. So I put it right here on the frame rail. But you need to take the adapter here. It has 3 bolt holes, as you can see right there. You need to put it on there wherever you want to put it. Take a Sharpie and go through the hole and make a mark. Start your first hole. I used a 5/16 tap set, which it comes with a drill bit and a 5/16 tap. And then got the same size bolts and lock washers for it. That's how I got it mounted on there. And then we'll have to, the Permacool kit comes with rubber hoses, but I'm going to upgrade to the steel braided hoses, and I'll also show you how to make steel braided hoses. When you're going to install your oil filter relocation kit, your adapter on your block here, you go ahead and remove your oil filter. When you're going to install your fitting for your oil pressure gauge or your turbo line or whatever, you need to remove your oil pressure sending unit, your stock one. This is what I'm going to use on my oil pressure port on my block to tee it off. There's a few different things you could use. Some have like a adapter plate that hook on to where the oil filter was, but this one here, it's got the 1/8 inch BSPT threads, which is the size of the hole in the block for the oil pressure sending unit, and the end of this one's also tapped out for that, so I'm going to put that on the end of it, and then you have 3 other holes that you can hook anything you need to. And I'm going to be using this for my oil pressure gauge. It's electric, so it keeps the oil out of the interior of the car. If you use mechanical, I wouldn't recommend mechanical oil pressure gauge, because if the line busts or whatever, it's going to get all over the inside of your car, and it's not a good thing. What you need to do when you go to install them, whatever you're doing, you need to take some RTV or whatever, some high temp gasket, and put around the edge of the thread right there for when it tightens down onto a block. It'll tighten it on there, and also all these adapter and block off plates that you need that you're not using, you need to put some gasket maker on them too, and also on the thread of that, so it don't leak anymore. And basically on your sending unit, you need to put some on there too. I don't know if you can see that or not. You can see the old gasket maker on the edge of the thread there. You don't need to put it all the way on all the threads, just put it at the back of the threads where it's going to tighten down. You'll be good on all those. Okay, now as you can see, I have my oil filter relocation adapter plate on. Don't forget to put your rubber O-ring on and put some motor oil on it to seal it up real good and get it as tight as you possibly can by hand. And you have the oil pressure sending unit, well, the oil pressure gauge sending unit right there. It has a RTV high temp gasket maker on the threads of it, tightened down. As you can also see, I had to trim my bracket down a little bit. I didn't have to trim it down as far as I did, but at the time I was doing something else, so I had to point it down a little more. But you will still have to trim it a little bit. And then I still have my stock sending unit on there, and I still have 2 more ports on each side there that have RTV on all those too. But as you can see, I don't really have a whole lot of room to put anything else on there the way it's set up. But that's all I was going to do anyway, so it's good enough. As you can see, I have my adapter plate on my motor already in the car. The left side of it right there is my out, and the right side is my in. Best way to figure that out is the hole that's most centered on the adapter is your out, and then the other side that's on the outside of it is the in. And my other adapter plate's down here. The one on the left side there is my out, and the one on the right side is my in. The one closest to the firewall there is my out, and the one towards the engine bay is the in. So basically what you do is you just run in to out and out to in. That's pretty much all you do. But what you have to do is you have to go ahead and install your adapter plates on the engine and on the car, wherever you're going to put it. But as you can see, I don't have a whole lot of room to put mine, so I put mine down here on the frame rail. Just make sure wherever you put it, the oil filter itself is higher than the oil pan. That's the only thing you got to look out for. It don't matter if it goes upside down or straight up. But when you get everything in there, just take what I used was, I just used some blue hose there. It's basically this air hose, an air hose for an air compressor. And I went ahead and screwed my adapters on my plates and everything, and measured it out. Okay, when going to install the oil filter relocation kit, I'm going to use the steel braided lines instead of the rubber lines that comes with the Permacool kit. So really, you'd be cheaper off just to buy block adapter plate and the oil filter adapter plate, and then buy the fittings and the steel braided line rather than a kit itself. You're going to come out cheaper that way than buying the whole kit and plus all this stuff. But what I have here is a -10 AN steel braided line. It's a 6 foot of line right there from Russell. And then you have some various adapters. The ones on the left hand side are -10 AN on the bottom, -10 AN on the bottom, and on the top side they're 3/8 inch MPT, because that's what my adapter plates are. Instead of 1/2 inch, mine's a 3/8 inch. So basically that's what that does. It takes my adapter plate and makes it go into a -10 AN, so I can do the steel braided lines. And then I have -10 90-degree fittings and -10 straight fittings. But to show you how these work, they both work the exact same way. As you can see there, the red's come apart off the blue there. Pretty much all you have to do is you take the red side, and it has thread inside the red side as well, and it pretty much goes over the steel braided line like that. Of course, you press it down and screw it down all the way, and then the blue side will actually go inside it, because the steel braided line will actually come up to about right here, and then this will actually go inside the hose itself. You'll smash it in there, and then you'll start screwing it down like so. I can't get it threaded in. Just start screwing it in like that. And after you get everything hooked on and everything, I'll show you how to assemble it later. You have the swivel on the end for where it's going to screw to, so you'll have that movable there. So that shows you how that works. But really, when you're going to install, all you need to do, like when it comes from the factory or whatever, it has tape on the end of it. When you go to measure your size and the size you want, you pretty much just take a piece of electrical tape, wrap it around a couple times as tight as you can get it, and then take a Dremel or a cutoff wheel and slice it in the middle of the tape. So you want to put your tape on there in between where your mark is for your size, and then you'll just cut it off. If it takes the tape off or wants to pull the tape off, then replace it after you get done, because the steel braided line, it'll come untwined and unravel and everything, and just one little thing off there will just cut you open big time. That stuff ain't no joke. So definitely wear gloves when you do all this stuff. And on all these fittings, make sure, I mean, they're precision cut, you know, so make sure you have the threads going in straight, because you easily strip these things out. You'll know when you go to buy them that they ain't cheap at all. You need to go ahead and figure in on this hose going in that far on the fitting, a good inch, you know, a good inch, maybe an inch and a quarter. It's going to go inside that. So instead of getting, you know, all the way to the edge of that from there, you're gonna, because you're gonna have, like, you know, a good 2.5 inches extra if you don't make for this leeway right here, because that hose is actually going to go that far into that. And that's about the size of what it's going to be. So make sure you do that on both sides, on this end and the other end of it, when you're going to measure your stuff out. And then after you get your measurements, just go ahead and cut your line and install your hoses and everything. Alright, as you can see, I got blue electrical tape on right here. This is my first cut. And then I have my cutoff wheel on my Dremel. You don't want to cut it too fast, but you don't want to cut too slow neither. Just get it and get it as straight as you can all the way around. It's your best bet. I'd say a good speed 8 on your Dremel. Don't forget to wear your safety goggles. So after you make your cut, you want to make sure it's all clean and it's pretty much as flat as possible. You're not going to get it perfect, but, you know, get it as flat as you possibly can, because you're still going to stick the fitting in there and tighten it down. That's what's going to seal it up. So it don't have to be perfectly flush, because when you use the Dremel, it kind of goes at an angle. You can't really get it on there to cut it straight down. So don't really worry about that. Just try your best to get it as flush as you can, though, and make sure you don't get no strands coming off of it. That's the most important things. And after you cut it, if your tape's all burned up or tore up, then pull it off and retape it, which I would recommend doing that anyways, just to get, you know, a good length of tape on there and everything. It's going to help it when you go to install it, so you don't pull off anymore, you don't unwind anything. After you got wrapped up again with another coat of electrical tape, basically what you do is you pull the old one off and you wrap it 2 good layers of tight. Pull it tight and wrap it 2 rounds, and that'll be good enough. And then you can take your fitting here. You want to take it and slide it on there. You don't want to get it to pull the steel braided lines. You don't want to unravel anymore. Try and turn it on there while you're putting it on rather than just shoving it down on there. As it's going on there, you want to press down and twist. It's going to tear up the tape. Don't worry about that, because you can always get that off later. All the tape was on there for us, so it didn't start unwinding the steel braided line on there. But like I say, the fitting's got threads on the inside of it, so you want to keep twisting it on there. And you want to do this by hand. You do not want to use a tool in this, because you don't want to tear this fitting up like that. You want to do it by hand. It's going to be tough, but you can do it. Once you get to the end, you'll be able to see the hose touching the fitting. It's the threads for the blue one here on the red one. Threads for the blue one on the red one. The hose will bottom out on those there. Basically, it's gonna thread onto the hose, and you're not gonna be able to thread it anymore, and you'll also see it touching there. So that's when you know you got it all the way. And then you go ahead and take this fitting and smash it in there and start tightening it down. Just make sure that your fitting's going into the hole of the hose rather than smashing it into the rubber side of the hose, the rubber on the inside of the hose. You don't want to cut the rubber of the inside of the hose. It should start to go in it fairly easily. Just like that. And then as soon as you get the threads there, you press on a little bit and start the threads. Don't press too hard and turn too hard. Make sure you have your threads threaded in properly, because these things will strip out real easily, and you don't want to tear these fittings up. Basically what this is doing, as you've seen, it was tapered going in. It's basically going inside the hose and expanding out the hose up against the inside the red fitting. That's what gives it the real tight fitting like that. Okay, when you get to the point where you can't hand tighten it anymore, you want to use adjustable wrenches, because they have flat edges on them so they don't tear up the fittings. Just get them on there and then start tightening them down with those wrenches. And also, while you're tightening it down, make sure that your hose is not backing out of the red fitting. And pretty much what you're going to do, you're going to take this blue fitting all the way down to you can't see any more threads on it. It's basically going to bottom out onto the red one. They make AN wrenches for these that you could use, but things cost like 60, 70 bucks, so this is a much cheaper method right here. You can never be too tight on these things though. Make sure you get it all the way tight, because you don't want an oil leak. It's a little time consuming, but you know, it's well worth it. Don't worry so much about scarring them up a little bit. You are going to scar them up a little bit. After you get it all the way tight, this is the finished product of the end. The blue's all the way down to the red. It's tightened down as tight as it'll go. As you can see, you still have the blue tape showing on the outside of red. If you don't like that look, just take your X-Acto knife or a razor blade, cut that off around, and just pull it off. That's it. As you can see, the fitting does get scratched up a little bit. You know, you probably take more time, use the AN wrenches or something like that, and get it where it don't even scratch up at all. And that's it.